legalizefreedom.com.
Good evening. I'm Greg Moffat of legalizefreedom.com. That's legalize-freedom.com. You can spell legalize with an S or a Z. And this is just a short response to inquiries, messages, questions that I've had from many listeners over the last several months regarding the coronavirus crisis, specifically what it really means, what's behind it. Now, we're several months into this, so certainly there's been plenty of time for theories to coalesce, and my initial theories I still stick to, and they're far from original. The first thing that occurred to me when all of this started, particularly when the lockdown began to make its way across European countries, it arrived in the UK on March the 23rd, we're now almost in July, was that this was something to do with either the global financial system or in some way linked to climate change. And it may in fact be either of those or some combination of both, because they are interrelated, of course. Now, as I say, many other researchers, writers, broadcasters had the same basic ideas at the same time regarding the global financial system. Now, this is obviously debt-based, as most of you will understand, and the burden of debt that by governments, corporations, non-governmental organizations, banks, even right down to small companies, individuals, that the level of debt overall globally has been rising for a long time, and most of our currencies are debt-based. So this is hardly surprising, and governments and a lot of households as well tend to spend more than they bring in. That racks up debt. Now, particularly around about the time of the financial crash in 07-08, there were lots of people writing and saying that the global debt bubble had become unsustainable and it was about to pop. And this is why governments around the world at that time threw all the money at banks in order to stop them, going bust. Some of them did, not very many. Too big to fail was the mantra at that time. Now, after that incident, which by the way I think has been ongoing ever since, we're still living in that financial crash, basically we're told something had to change or we're in danger of repeating the experience with much worse consequences, and maybe governments wouldn't be able to bail out banks this time around. Now, of course, nothing really changed in the interim, because that would require fundamentally changing the system, and this is what I'm getting to. So we're now in a situation where there are trillions and trillions of debt right across the world with all the entities that I mentioned earlier. And most of us have known what it's like to be in debt personally, how onerous that can be, the constant pressure of it. But it may be that system, which was, this was debt that was never going to be paid off, basically. So those of us who think about these things, we're thinking, well, how is that going to end? How will that be unwound? Because the idea of cancelling the debt, debt jubilee as they call it, always seemed to be unthinkable, because even though banks get bailed out, individuals tend not to get bailed out. And if there was going to be some kind of debt jubilee for banks and governments, lots of people would quite rightly be saying, what about me? What about us? We've been run into debt because other organizations or our employers or whatever were in debt. So we're kind of victims of this as much as anything else. So it may be that what's going on now is some kind of, not a smoke screen, but, a chaotic situation in which all sorts of things can be achieved without many people noticing or paying attention. Those of us who are old enough to have lived through 9/11 will remember never letting a good crisis go to waste and all that. And we are still today living with things that were implemented at the time of 9/11, many of which, young adults born after 9/11 have got no idea why they're taking their shoes and belts off in the airports, or why you can't take a bottle of water through security. But apparently the security people's idea is that you take all these potential bombs and put them in a big box just over there, and then suddenly they're neutralized. Of course, they're not. Anyway, it may be that what's currently happening with the pandemic is an opportunity for a restructuring, a controlled demolition. Controlled demolition, this is the phrase that has been used, of the already teetering financial world, economy. That this can be done under cover of this, or be used as a justification for it. Well, because obviously governments are now throwing trillions at institutions and individuals to support businesses and banks and corporations during this time. Well, we had to do it because of the pandemic. Therefore, but it's now left us in this terrible position. We'll have to restructure. So this may be an opportunity to finally do that. Whether that would be potentially a positive, whether they change the underlying nature of the system, move to a non-debt based system, whether it ends up being the attempt to implement a global currency, perhaps it will be all digital and various ways of doing this. Quite what happens to all the people who are owed money in this situation, I'm not quite sure. Now, so there's that. Things to look out for, that's one of them. Now, whether you believe that the COVID-19 was completely naturally occurring in the natural environment and it just happens to have spread across to humans, whether you think, on the other hand, that it's bioengineered in a lab and released deliberately, or whether you think perhaps it might be a naturally occurring thing that they were working on in a lab, maybe developing weapons, who knows, and it accidentally got out, or whether your thoughts lie somewhere along that spectrum, it doesn't really matter. So a lot of people cry, engineered crisis, therefore they can do this controlled demolition. Well, they could do it even if it's naturally occurring. So who knows my point being, it doesn't matter what you think about the origins of this, it still provides an opportunity for all sorts of shenanigans. The other thing I mentioned at the start, the second strand of my thinking, was climate change. Now, we all know what the situation is regarding that, what the official position is generally across the world. It's that there is ongoing climate change. It's getting worse. It will be bad for the planet. It may even make it uninhabitable for humans. Doom and gloom scenarios proliferate. And against the backdrop of that, however, we have this, particularly in the West, but also increasing parts of the world seeking to emulate the West. Of course, we have consumer economies that are built on buying stuff, basically earning money, buying stuff, churning through it. Things are not built to last. They get disposed of. And in a debt-based economy, that sort of consumerism is necessary. So there's been no sign of that slowing on any significant level, far from it. And however people might be modifying their behavior, getting solar panels on their roof or buying, recycled materials. If you look at the main barometer for this, if you'll pardon the pun, I suppose, is the global carbon output emissions. Now, whether you think that's, whether you think any of this climate change is a problem for the planet or not, doesn't actually matter. Some people clearly do. And whether you think that humans contribute significantly to climate change or not, doesn't matter. Some people clearly do, people with their hands on the levers of power. But despite all the rhetoric and decades now of environmental horror stories and doomsday scenarios, and in recent times the efforts of Greta Thunberg and all her handlers and Extinction Rebellion, those carbon emissions have simply gone up year on year. We keep talking about, we're having climate summits and we've got new deadlines in which to cut emissions, blah, 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 electric cars, yada, yada, yada. It doesn't seem to make any difference. So it may be, as I was saying a moment ago, that this pandemic crisis could be used to do what decades of everything that's been tried prior to this just could not get done. Because it looked like we cannot get human beings to stop burning through the planet's resources. I say we cannot, whoever is making efforts to slow things down. So basically the scope and the scale of the human enterprise, according to some people, had to be brought under control. It had to be reduced. Population reduction was one way of doing that. But look at what's happened since the lockdowns. We all familiar with it. People are not buying things. The shops are closed. They're not going anywhere. The planes are grounded. It's starting to loosen up a bit now. But you see the dramatic reductions in pollution and emissions and all of those metrics virtually overnight was something to behold. And again, you can talk about the positives in that, the clear water and the canals of Venice and clear skies over LA, and that's all well and good. Who wouldn't want that? Not really the issue. Those are side benefits. But that was the second thing that occurred to me on March 23rd, or a couple of days beforehand, when I took my last train trip. It was like, wow. And I had such conflicted feelings about it, because I thought, I don't like this. I don't like what's happening. And then I thought, finally, has somebody somewhere, whether it's regarding the global financial system or the climate situation, said enough is enough. We have to do something about this. We can't get people to go along, so they're going to have to be brought along. There are signs you can look for that some of this may be happening. It remains to be seen. As I say, we're almost into July now. Lockdowns are starting to ease. I should add, by the way, there wasn't really a lockdown. That's something that happens in American prisons. We were not actually confined to our homes for the most part, though we basically self-police in order to make all of that happen. But it remains to be seen how things come back to anything like approaching normal, what the world will look like within the next few months. And if 9/11 is anything to go by, to the extent that you can make comparisons with the situation now, it may be that 10 years from now, 20 years from now, we're thinking back to this time and say, oh, that's when the great change happened. That's when human affairs, for better or worse, richer or poorer, turned a corner. That was a turning point. For more on this, if you're interested, especially if you believe that only print is real, if you get the latest issue of New Dawn magazine, that's the latest special issue, Living in the Corona Apocalypse, that's my piece. In there I talk more about all of this, and also with two analysts of world affairs and two social critics who I admire and respect greatly. That is James Howard Kunstler and Dmitry Orlov. They are both former guests on legalizefreedom.com. Their current interviews are there also, by the way. And if you look at the shows that have been released on the website and indeed on YouTube over the last couple of months, if you're interested, I've done 6, 7, maybe even 8 shows devoted to different dimensions of the coronavirus crisis. So check those out. But yeah, once again, latest issue of New Dawn, you can get that at newdawnmagazine.com. So until next time, I'm Greg Moffat. You've been listening to legalizefreedom.com.
legalizefreedom.com